Hi, welcome to our weekly 3-minute therapy podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, and clinical psychologist and author, and I'll turn it over to my co-host, Mick Berry. Mick, you're on.
Okay, I'm doing the intro today. So, rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT for short, is a therapy that was devised by Albert Ellis in the 1950s in response to the ineffective therapy he had been practicing, which was psychoanalytic Freudian therapy. He wanted to come up with a form of therapy that would actually be effective, and it precedes cognitive therapy. Albert Ellis recognized that it's not the things that happen to us that cause us to be emotionally upset or emotionally disturbed. It's the way that we look at them that causes us to be emotionally disturbed. Cognitive therapy is an offshoot of this, but Albert Ellis devised this initially, rational emotive behavior therapy, and it teaches people to recognize their irrational thoughts. Our irrational thoughts are unrealistic, such as things must always go well or the world must treat me fairly. And REBT recognizes that these thoughts are what make us mentally disturbed, not the things that happen to us. And since then, in the 1950s, when Albert Ellis devised it, he kept refining it, and it took off, and cognitive therapy came out of it, and it completely revolutionized the world of therapy because it is quite effective. And in fact, I think Michael Edelstein and I would say we found it to be the most effective form of therapy. Does that cover it?
Yeah, pretty much covers it. The only thing I would add is that not only does our thinking uh, influence and cause our emotions, but also our behaviors.
Well, I would say that our thinking influences our behaviors, but then it's our thinking, once we are thinking in a certain way, then we choose to behave in a certain way with the high likelihood of behaving that way based on our thinking.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a high likelihood or an actual cause. I would think it's an actual cause, but you might be correct there.
Well, I think people can choose not to act and just sit in their room and be depressed. Although that would be behavior, wouldn't it?
Not if they're thinking, I must have a drink right now, then normally that would cause them to have a drink
Well,
right now,
that
if that's available.
well, that's true. However, I was correcting myself and saying if somebody just stayed in their room and was depressed, that would be behavior that came out of their thinking that I can't get anything done. I'm a complete loser. What's the point in doing anything?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that
Exactly.
would create behavior. Nevertheless, I don't think it really matters that much splitting hairs. Behavior comes out of our thinking, out of our emotions and our thinking. And emotions and thinking and behavior are intimately connected, and I think they are always connected pretty much. I mean, if I'm crossing the street and a car almost hits me, I'm going to jump back and probably feel flustered. But then once I have the capacity to reflect on it, which is only in a matter of seconds, I'm going to be associating thoughts with the occurrence. Although I think you would say, Michael, that if I almost get hit by a car and I'm flustered, that's because I have the thought I will do best not to get hit by a car, or I must not get hit by a car.
Yeah, I agree with that. So today we're going to be discussing necessity is the mother of invention. Uh, and by necessity, what do you mean?
Well, this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this because there is the phrase necessity is the mother of invention, but REBT would say that nothing is actually necessary. Would you say that's correct?
Nothing is necessary in the absolutistic sense, right?
Yeah, in the sense of nothing has to go any certain way. I've wondered about that though, because don't I have to eat? But I suppose it would be if I want to continue to stay alive, I have to eat.
Uh, well, maybe right now. but maybe in the future there'll be ways. Actually, there are people in the hospital who don't eat, but they stay alive through IV tubes that feed them something, something
Okay.
that's nourishing.
Well, suppose I have to go to the bathroom. Don't I need to give way to that bodily function?
Uh, yeah, that's right. And I agree with that. Yeah, that's one thing that you have no choice, I would think.
Well,
You can only hold it in for so long.
yeah, well, so would this refute the idea that REBT says nothing has to happen? However, I suppose one could say, well, it's possible not to go to the bathroom. I could shoot myself and I won't be going to the bathroom, but going to the bathroom is the best choice that I can make by
Yeah, I
far.
think that's a good way to put it.
Okay, all right. Well, anyway, with necessity is the mother of invention. Many things have, I think that sentence and idea exists because many things have come about and been invented because people found this was necessary. However, it was necessary in the sense of if we wanted to have something, we had better invent it. If we want to be able to go from New York to Paris in 8 hours, we better invent an airplane. Or if we want to be able to enjoy food 12 months out of the year, we had better invent a refrigerator. So I think it's not as specific as it could be to say necessity is the mother of invention, as it would be more accurate to say high priorities are the mother of invention.
Yeah, high priorities and acting on them
Yeah.
is what often causes new ideas, new things to come into play.
Right. And one of the reasons this intrigues me is because REBT, one of the things that I've learned through you, the greater our passion, the greater our desire, the greater the tendency is to flip that desire into a demand. But as we know, nothing must actually occur at any particular time. And REBT teaches people to eliminate their demands, but keep their high priorities or keep their strong desires and strong passions. I have found one of the challenges, and it's a fun challenge, with maintaining my own mental health or being as mentally healthy as I think I can be, is to continue to have big passions that I want a great deal. In fact, some things that I want more than anything else I can think of without turning those into a demand. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point because you give up your must. I must do well. That doesn't mean you give up and don't try at all, as you're saying, because underneath the must is a preference. I strongly prefer to do well, so I'll practice, practice, practice in order to do well at whatever I'd like to do well at. So don't give up your must by giving up your preferences, but keep your preferences and work on those.
I think you meant to say don't give up your preferences by giving up your must.
Yes, right.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Um, and so I've known several people, and in fact, people, I've seen this with Buddhism, saying, well, give up all desires. I think that's utterly ridiculous. And I myself was mixed up with what I would classify a cult decades and decades ago. And the catchphrase was, well, you're too attached to the outcome. What does that mean? You're too attached to the outcome. That's very vague. REBT would say you're demanding the outcome. But people would often say, well, I'm attached to the outcome. I want to have no care whatsoever about the outcome of my efforts and not have any care, and then I'll be enlightened and spiritually evolved. I think that's ridiculous. We want to have some stake in the outcome of our efforts. Would you say that's correct?
Oh, absolutely. If you don't have some stake or some incentive or motivation to achieve something, some stake in your efforts, and you won't do anything. Also, the idea of give up all preferences is a performative contradiction because give up all preferences is a preference.
Well, actually, what people often do is they turn that into a demand. I must give up all preferences.
Right.
They drive themselves crazier and they can't understand, gee, I'm following this particular school of thought and I'm feeling incredibly agitated. People, as you've pointed out, don't catch the secondary demand that they make on, or the secondary disturbance they make by making a demand about a demand. As Albert Ellis said, craziest thought you can have is, I must be rational. Now, I know when I've discussed this with people, they've often said, well, that just means that there's no hope whatsoever. If you can't demand to be rational, then you can't possibly be rational. But REBT would correct that and say, no, you can have a strong preference to be rational. You can have a great big passion to be rational without demanding to be rational. I have found for myself to keep strong passions and not have a demand, it takes practice and it still takes continual practice, but it's a lot of fun. It's great fun to have a big desire and not demand that it has to happen.
Well, I'm glad that's your idea of fun. And the more fun it is, the more likely it is you're going to work on it. Also, I want to say we were discussing musts. There are three main musts, and that is a demand on oneself. I must do well and get approval. And that leads to anxiety, guilt, and depression. A demand on others. You must treat me well. And that leads to anger and resentment and hostility. And then the third must is a demand on the impersonal conditions of one's life. The conditions of my life, my situations must be fair, easy, and hassle-free. And if it's not, it's awful, terrible, and horrible.
And I wanted to give an example, a great example of some people having a big, what they would call necessity or a huge passion. If you take the Beatles, Lennon and McCartney started writing songs together when they were 15 and 17 years old. And their goal was to become incredibly famous and incredibly successful in the music field. And because of that, they knew they needed to have great songs. So they kept notebooks with themselves 24 hours a day. Every idea they got, they would write down and they would constantly work on it. And at the age of 15 and 17, they were writing songs constantly in order to achieve their goal. And they were also incredibly scrutinizing of their own work. And throughout virtually every song they wrote at those young ages, they kept a few of them, which ended up becoming some of their hits. But they determined, we've got to really be good here. And if these songs aren't good, they're not going to aid us. So their necessity of wanting to become successful in the music field gave rise to the invention of all the songs that they wrote.
Yeah. And they probably meant it would be desirable for us to be really good rather than we have to be really good.
We don't know. We could ask Paul McCartney if we ever could get a hold of him.
Yeah,
Were
right.
they demanding that they succeed, or were they simply wanting to succeed a great deal? Another example of that would be Shakespeare, as he was churning out plays once or twice a year, and he needed to keep his company going. He had an acting company and they were at the Globe Theater, and he was constantly writing plays for this company to perform, and he ended up writing 37 plays. So that was another example of invention happening. I mean, we could take any invention that we have right now. Well, for one thing, the internet and computers or the telephone. We want to be able to communicate when we're not in the same vicinity, and Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone for those ends in 1876. And it's been refined ever since. Well, we have a phone with a cord. We can do better than that. We have a phone on the wall that we need the operator to connect us. I talked to some people that were operators. They were shoving in lines back in 1950. you would get a call and you'd have to plug in the cords and go into the room and plug in the cords so people's numbers would be connected. And I think, Michael, you're old enough to remember when you called Europe when we were kids, there was about a 4 or 5 hour wait to get connected.
And it was quite expensive also.
Yeah, right. So necessity is the mother of invention. I would say, if we want to be accurate in REBT terms, which is not as pithy and probably not as useful to remember, but maybe very useful to implement, that great passion is the mother of invention.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Also, you could say idleness is the mother of invention because if you're idle and you want to uh, make things easier for yourself, then that could be the mother of certain inventions.
Well, that would be a specific desire. You want to remain idle. I
Right.
suppose that right now, you and I sitting here rather than having to get up and shout from the rooftops in order for us to hear each other means that we're able to sit here comfortably and be idle while we talk, as is everybody that's sitting at home. I find this very funny often that on the internet people are complaining about certain things and they're using the internet to do it. In other words, they're complaining about science while they're using the internet to complain about science, which I find very amusing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So necessity is the mother of invention. I find that useful in terms of creating things in my own life, but I also find it useful to remember that nothing has to happen and that what I want doesn't have to occur. And that by saying that what I want doesn't have to happen, I'm able to eliminate the mental disturbance and focus on the task and be much more efficient in achieving my goals. One perfect example is playing piano. While I'm working on something, I'm making mistakes all over the place. And if I tell myself I have to get this, then I have to get it right now. I will not be practicing as well. I won't be as relaxed, and relaxation is necessary to learn an instrument. And if I tell myself I don't have to get this, I want to a great deal, but this does not have to happen, and I don't need it to be easier. Often, tell me what you think about this, Michael. I think when people can remember, I don't need this to be easier, it makes it easier to learn how to do something.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
So we mention these points because I think you and I continually implement REBT to make our own lives more happy and our own lives more productive and more rewarding and having more things to share with people so that we're moving in a positive direction of more and more happiness and more elegant solutions in our life that make things easier and more pleasurable. I think you would agree with that.
Yeah, and we learned it from Albert Ellis, who you mentioned earlier, is started this movement to think more rationally rather than to think about your childhood and other tangential kinds of things.
Right. And one of the things I've heard Albert Ellis say, what was I going to mention here? Shoot, I forgot. That well, thought slipped my mind. Uh,
Yeah, I think that's a sign it's time to wrap it up.
yeah, probably.
Oh, I'd like to thank you, Mick, for your great participation. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, a clinical psychologist and author of 3 Minute Therapy, and I have a website called 3minutetherapy.com. Thank you, Chris Rossini, our tech engineer. Give us a thumbs up if you felt this was valuable to you, and give us a like. Volunteer if you'd like to be a guest. We've had guests in the past. And subscribe to the 3 Minute Therapy podcast to do what, Mick?
To stay on the rational side of life and the mother of invention.